Welcome to Infinite Bridges, a podcast powered by the ASD Project. The ASD Project is a student-led initiative that is working to fight the stigma surrounding autism spectrum disorder. We want to help students, parents, and educators understand ASD and feel empowered to make a difference in the autistic community. I'm Addison Kurtin, the co-founder of the ASD Project, and I'll be your host today. I'm so excited to welcome developmental and behavioral pediatrician and founder of the Autism Early Intervention Program, The Play Project, Dr. Rick Solomon. Dr. Rick, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for the invitation.
Of course. So let's get started with our first topic for today, working with parents and caregivers throughout an autism diagnosis. To begin, could you explain a bit about each of the most common reactions that parents display upon finding out that their child has an autism diagnosis?
So as a developmental and behavioral pediatrician, I have been responsible for making the diagnosis on probably over 1,000 children in my career. I'm getting old, and what I've noticed is that parents have. I've kind of divided up into four typical presentations, kind of in reactions, I should say, in order of frequency. So, I work out of Ann Arbor. I was in a private practice setting most of my life, although I worked in university settings too. And I can tell you that these reactions are universal. The first and actually most common reaction to the diagnosis is parents will say, literally, I had many parents say to me, "We've already grieved." It's like we knew that our child was different. We knew that there was something, with their development that was very concerning. We thought they might have autism, and we looked it up online, and we convinced ourselves that he does have autism. So your diagnosis doesn't surprise us. It's more confirming. And these families will say, we've already grieved. Now, that doesn't mean that they aren't continuing to feel sad about the diagnosis. But their reaction is not dramatic. The second group are the ones who come into my office and they don't know what their child has developmentally in terms of a diagnosis. And these are the families that will literally sob or grieve. I went through boxes of Kleenex when I say, I'm certain, I feel certain that your child is on the autism spectrum. And I just pause. And the tears start flowing, and I get emotional just thinking about it because it's not what parents want to hear typically, and they grieve right in front of me. The third reaction is disbelief. You can see I don't how could you make this diagnosis? You've only spent a couple of hours with my child. We spend our lives with our child. I said, and I can see on their faces right away that there's doubt, about my diagnosis. And I'm, one of those doctors that I welcome a second opinion. I tell children, I tell the parents, your children should get us. If you have any doubts about my evaluation, please, get a second opinion. But I do add this. I say the one thing that I don't want for you is regret. If I'm right about your child's diagnosis, there's a lot you can do to help your child. And I don't want you to feel sorry that you didn't do what needed to be done for your child. And they say, well, we may seek a second opinion, but what do you think we ought to do? And so I think there's only one emotion more powerful than denial, and that is regret. And so I really just, feel for them. I don't want them to make a mistake about helping their child. The fourth reaction is mostly comes from fairly religious parents who actually accept the diagnosis without grief or too much grief. or sadness. And they basically say, this is, God gave us this child. We love this child. We're going to do whatever we need to do to help them. And so those are kind of the four main reactions that I've gotten. And then starts the process of working through grief and coming to acceptance. And this is really one of the areas that I have a little bit of a difference with the neurodiversity community, is that parents don't typically accept their neurodivergent child right off the bat. And I think a lot of them are saddened, and they don't want a diagnosis of anything wrong, any developmental delays of any kind. They want their typical children to grow up normally. So that's kind of, I would say, the most common reactions, and then starts the process, of how to help them.
Yeah, that makes sense. It definitely seems like this diagnosis can evoke a wide range of emotions. So one thing you talked about is helping these parents and families move from grief to empowerment. So how do you and your organization, the Play Project, accomplish this in regards to autism?
Well, I think one of my main jobs as a developmental pediatrician is to accurately offer parents options that will give them hope. And the good news is that you can very honestly and authentically offer hope to these families who have young children with autism. I don't want to give them false hope, but the fact is, through all my years of experience, that children with autism have a peculiar potential, different from almost any other developmental condition. The nature of their brain structure is such that if you provide intensive early intervention, and I don't want to call it treatment because I don't want to treat them as objects, but when you offer intensive, and by intensive, I'll define what that means, they can make tremendous progress. There's evidence now that children can outgrow their diagnosis. I don't like to use the word cure because I don't think that that's accurate, but I think they can become so developmentally appropriate, socially, functionally, that they can outgrow their diagnosis. I have many children who are now young adults who really are truly functional in the world. So their capacity that autism has built within it for the majority of children, the capacity to make tremendous growth and to reach their full potential. And so I give families real hope. And the Play Project, which is our early intervention model, coaches parents and empowers parents. And probably the thing that I think makes the Play Project most effective and really leads toward a neurodiversity perspective is that we teach the families to truly accept their child where their child's at developmentally, which is the fastest way to help them make progress. So the Play Project is an early intervention model that has, we call it the 7 circles of the Play Project, that actually coaches the parents to accept their child where they're at developmentally, to meet their child where their child's at developmentally, and have fun with their child, and to be playful. That's where the name comes from, Play, but it stands for Play and Language for Autistic Youngsters, PLAY. And by being playful and being joyful and being present and not stressing about how to force your child to make progress, the children make progress. And it's remarkable. And then what we do is we change our model over time as the child evolves. Last thing I'll say about this is that we use a developmental framework called DIR, Developmental Individual Differences and Relationship-Based Model, that truly empowers the family through daily activities and routines to engage with their child in a way that really promotes the social back and forth, because this is the very nature of autism, is that these are children who struggle with social interaction, and they have dominating repetitive behaviors. They want to keep the world the same. And so what the Play Project does is it teaches the families, coaches the families, on how to engage the child in a way that promotes social interaction and reduces the need for repetitive behaviors because the children feel so comfortable in the world.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I definitely see how that approach could provide hope and empowerment to families.
No question about it. Families love this model because it honors the family's sadness at the same time that it gives them hope. And I would just add that our model is highly structured. It's I say we take play seriously. It's kind of my joke is that, but we take play seriously, and we give the families through our materials. We have a wonderful parent guide, and it coaches the parents in a structured way how to play in a way that's fun for the child.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I'm sure that this approach really allows parents and caregivers to learn how to connect with their autistic children in ways that may not be intuitive, but ways that end up strengthening their relationships. So the next thing that I wanted to talk with you about is your autism research. In 2014, you and your colleagues at Easter Seals and Michigan State University published the largest research study in the U.S. on the effectiveness of a parent-implemented model for helping young children with autism spectrum disorder. Could you speak about the research you conducted and the results that you found?
Yeah, this was a dream come true. We received an almost $2 million grant from the federal government, NIMH, the National Institutes of Mental Health, which is really the highest level of grant giving, in the country. And the design of it was to actually implement the Play Project model that I just described in the real world. This is very unusual. This is outside of a university setting. We worked with Easter Seals sites in 5 different sites around the country, and we trained the Easter Seals professionals to coach the parents. That's really what we do in the Play Project. Our mission, our vision is to coach child development professionals to help the families. And so that's what we did. And we did it in the real world. And what we did is we had what's called a randomized control trial, where we had, just to give you a concrete example, we enrolled, let's say, 2 children. We flip a coin, so to speak. It's a randomized trial. One goes into the Play Project, one continues with their usual intervention. And the usual intervention was not nothing. Almost all these children had at least a dozen hours of preschool and speech and language therapy. And all we did was we added the Play Project to their services, where we coached the parents. So this was done at home. The parents really didn't have to change any of their routines. It integrates naturally into the home environment. It's called naturalistic. And then we compared those children who got the Play Project versus those children who had treatment as usual, TAU in the research language. And what we found is that, number one, the parents learned the model. So we were able to videotape. So we videotaped interactions, and we used standardized measures for both groups. And we showed that the parents, this was the work of responsive teaching. We videotaped and used those measures of this measure called the maternal behavior rating scale. And what we did is we showed that the families who participated in play were more sensitive to their children. They were more responsive to their children, and they were more interactive with their children. And this was dramatic. Not only that, the parents showed much less depression before and after we actually published an article on that. And so the other thing we showed for the children, of course, is that the children became more engaged. They initiated more. They were more compliant with demands. And they made major progress developmentally to the point where we measured autism severity between the two groups, and the children in the play project had less, their autism was less severe at the end of the 1-year trial than those children in the control group. So this was a major, it's actually called an effectiveness study because we did it in the real world in multiple sites. And subsequently, this research has been quoted in every major review of autism early intervention services. And the last thing I'll say is that the evaluation was not done by me. Okay, this evaluation was done through one of the best evaluation centers in the country at Michigan State University. Lori Van Egren and her group did an amazing job of keeping, it blinded, what's called blinded research. When they reviewed the videos, when they reviewed the evaluations, they didn't know who was in the treatment, who was in the control group. So this was a rigorously done, randomized control trial, and it was large. I mean, we had over 120 children, which is unheard of, and still to this day remains one of the biggest and best studies done on autism early intervention.
Wow, that sounds like an incredible research opportunity with some very impactful results. Now, the next thing I wanted to talk about is there are many myths about autism that have become prevalent, especially in recent years. Could you speak about some of these most common myths and then go into what the actual cause of autism is according to proven research?
So autism, let's start with what the real cause is. And I think that it's very clear now that it's largely genetically determined, although there are some environmental contributors. Parents who live near highly polluted sites were slightly more likely to have a child with autism. Pesticide residues. It appears that older mothers and older fathers seem to create a higher risk for autism. But the large majority of the cause of autism is genetic. And what you'll find when you do, which I do in my office all the time, is I take genograms, the family tree, and you will almost always find people in the family who have autism or traits of autism. And so what you'll see are people who tend to be very organized, very obsessive, often intelligent, like things to be in order. This orderliness, engineers, accountants, computer guys, these traits, which are genetic, get transmitted, and what happens then is the child is born with a brain that has what I call underconnected neuronal structure. So the way I explain it to parents is that it's like a net that is loose, and it can't capture the complexity of the world, and of which the most complex thing in the world is social interactions. And so this child has, and this has been shown, this is not my opinion, of course Shane and others have actually looked at the brains of children with autism and found that they have a range of abnormalities in their brains of disorganized neuronal connections that cause them to have trouble with the complexities of social life especially. And that also results in them wanting to keep the world organized and the same, which leads to their repetitive behavior. So that's the nature of autism. It's largely genetic, neurological. It's due to abnormalities of brain architecture that leads to difficulties with social interaction and dominating repetitive behaviors, as well as some sensory issues. Now, what autism is not caused by is Tylenol. It's not caused, by what you eat. It's not caused by, anything that the parents do to, the old days, autism was thought to be caused by what they called refrigerator parents. I really want to make it clear that autism is not caused by parenting, and it's not the parent's fault. And this is really important so that it removes any guilt that the parents have. This idea that Tylenol or that what you eat during pregnancy, there's just no evidence for that whatsoever. The other big myth that's out there, huge myth, is that immunizations cause autism. And this is absolutely not the case. Immunizations do not cause autism. And the reason that people believe this is because autism manifests itself at around 15 to 18 months in most children, and that's when people get immunizations. The MMR vaccination is usually given around 15 months. And so you have this, they get the shot, and then they start to show signs of autism, and the parents go, oh, the immunization caused autism, because when I got my shot, my kids started to look like they had autism. It's just a coincidence. And so, I would say those are kind of the main myths now. There are also a number of myths that have grown up around the treatment of autism, from, using gluten-free, casein-free diets, to using, peach pit extract. And now they're talking about giving cell treatment. And to my knowledge, at this point in time, there's really no evidence that external treatments change the course of life. The evidence is very clear and growing that early intensive intervention is the best. And I forgot to define what I meant by intensive. Is it all right if I go ahead and do that?
Yeah, of course.
So intensive early intervention means start early, okay? And you can begin as early as 12 months. Signs of autism start to emerge around 12 months. And I've had my share of families who recognize autistic-like features as early as 9 months. But officially, it's 12 to 14 months. So you want to start early, number one. You want to provide about 10 to 15 hours per week, okay, of one-on-one or one-on-two at the most ratio that is based on research. So this is part of the definition. It should be based on research, and the interventions should be comprehensive, because children with autism need speech and language therapy. They need sensory integration occupational therapy. They need exposure to other children through preschool. But they also really need this type of effective, evidence-based, one-on-one intensive early intervention. Now, the main models out there right now are ABA, because it's paid for by insurance, but it's not the only therapy. And personally, I am not a big fan of the ABA model. I worked with the inventor of the ABA model, Ivar Lovaas, back in the 1990s. I ran an ABA program, but what I loved was what I love is the developmental models that I believe are actually better than ABA for helping children with social interaction, which is the main issue. And so when parents look out, there's fundamentally two basic types of intervention. There's the behaviorist model, where you teach the children skills. And then there's the developmental model, where you do more playful interaction. And these are the two fundamental choices that parents have. Personally, I think that the developmental models are better for social interaction. They're better for imagination. They're better for understanding other people. They're also better for the parent-child relationship. So I recommend the developmental relationship-based interventions, DRBI, versus the ABA, applied behavior analysis models. But those are the two basic approaches that offer intensity.
Yeah, thank you for taking us through these. I think it's definitely important to understand the pros and cons of each of these models and figure out which treatments are actually backed by evidence.
Yeah, they both have now growing evidence for their effectiveness. And don't get me wrong, ABA can be very effective in teaching skills. I've actually found that when you combine a program like the Play Project, which is developmental early in life, then that actually sets the stage for ABA to be more effective. This hasn't been proven. This is just my clinical experience.
I see. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So the next thing I wanted to talk with you about is how you published a book called Autism, The Potential Within that serves as a guide for parents and therapists who are working with children who have been diagnosed with autism. So could you talk a little bit about your journey towards writing and publishing this book and explain the story that it tells?
Yeah. So this book flowed, right? This book flowed out of me after I had spent, a couple of decades in working with the children, and I decided to write a story about a family, the Grant family, and Jacob Grant. This was a composite. I had seen so many children with autism that I decided to, create a character and a family that I thought represented the large majority of children that I see. So this book, Autism, The Potential Within, is about Jacob Grant's life from the diagnosis at around 15 months to his entering kindergarten at 6 years. So the book is a story about how Jacob evolves. The first section, there's 3 sections of the book. The first is about diagnosis and considerations that parents should have when they consider what type of intensive intervention they should take. It talks about speech and language, occupational therapy. It's really an introduction to the whole range of therapies, including talking about immunizations not causing autism. There's a really cool chapter in the book about that. The second section is when Jacob Grant enters the Play Project, of course, and it tracks his developmental progress. And so in some sense, the second section is really what families can expect when their child makes progress along a developmental trajectory. And then the third section is Jacob Grant as he makes progress. It's called Jacob Grant Pain in the Butt. He's got every problem you can imagine. He doesn't eat well, he doesn't sleep well, he misbehaves with his brother. And so the third section is what I would call my parenting approach to helping children with autism who over time can definitely become difficult, to help, mostly with their behaviors. I do talk about medications. I do talk about the family reactions to the struggles. So the book includes, what it's like for families. But the theme of the book is hope, because it's called The Potential Within, and what it does is it shows exactly how children with autism reach their full potential through intensive early intervention using the Play Project approach.
Yeah, that sounds like an incredible way to help guide parents and caregivers through an autism diagnosis.
Well, I would just add that when I wrote the book, it was 300 pages in Word, but when I published the book, it was 600 pages. So it seems like a long book, but in fact, each chapter is a visit with me. And so you don't have to read the whole book. You can find the chapters that you want and read about the visit that the family had with me. And so I would just warn people that they should not be overwhelmed by the size of the book.
Yeah, that makes sense. So the last thing that I wanted to talk with you about today is something that you kind of touched on already, but there is always new research being published about the best ways to support children with autism. So do you have any final advice or tips that you would give to parents and caregivers who are trying to choose which intervention would be best for their children?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question. I think that right now in this country, we've evolved to a point of crisis where the diagnosis of autism has increased dramatically. In my life, it went from like 1 in 500 to 1 in 30 now. So we have thousands, tens of thousands of children who are being diagnosed, and yet our primary therapy paid for by insurance is very expensive, very time consuming, and this is the ABA model, which is changing, by the way. The insurance companies, more insurance companies are covering developmental approaches, but not on a large scale. So as a result, what's happened, sadly, is that we have tens of thousands of children waiting for both diagnosis and for intervention. And so what I've been promoting, this is right now, my life is, passionately involved in promoting coaching parents in a developmental framework through early intervention and using parent-implemented models so that parents don't have to wait for a diagnosis. They can get going because this is just fun, play-based interaction with your child. And it can reduce wait lists. It can get parents going right away. It can make a profound difference early on. And so this is, I'm really on a, public policy high horse here to try and get people to realize that they should be asking their early intervention provider. So if let's say the child has signs of autism, you don't even have to have a diagnosis. Let's say they have signs of autism at 2 years of age. They get enrolled in an early intervention program anywhere in the country because that's standard. Now parents can get early intervention, birth to 3, they're called birth to 3 programs. And they should be insisting that these birth to 3 programs coach them on autism-specific early intervention. That would make me very happy. I think the need is so great that we need to start doing that right away. And then for insurance companies to start paying for parent training models. It can reduce wait lists. It can empower the parents. It's everything that we've talked about, today. And, so I think that, the power of early intervention, intensive early intervention, and empowering parents is profound, both at a public policy level, but also at a human development level. The last thing I'll say is that I am now the pediatrician for many of these children who have grown up. And I'm hearing from the families, and I have seen the benefit. And what's so beautiful is that when you start to do this intensive early intervention early, you literally change the life course for these children and these families for the better. They become more functional, they become more social, they become more imaginative, they become more capable. You truly help them reach their full potential in a way that's neurodiversity affirming. And so, I think this is a really good place to end. We really need to promote parent-implemented interventions, and it will help thousands of children.
Yeah, it sounds like that can be incredibly important and powerful. So yeah, that was the last thing I wanted to talk with you about today. Thank you again so much for joining me.
Well, thank you for doing this. I'm so happy with your ASD podcast and what you're doing, and you're really helping families through this, and you're helping the children. So congratulations to you. It's been an honor to be here with you.
Thank you so much. I know I definitely learned a lot about parent involvement in early intervention and ongoing autism research.
All right, take care.
Thanks for tuning in to episode 5 of the Infinite Bridges podcast. Be sure to check out the ASDproject.org to learn more about what we do and what we have planned. See you soon for the next episode.